I am Camila, 30 years old. The day I brought my grandfather home from the hospital to his house in Boise, he looked at me across the breakfast table and whispered, "Would you like to test them with me?" I nodded, pulled out my phone, dialed my father's number and put it on speaker. It rang twice. When he answered, I kept my voice perfectly flat. "Dad, Grandpa passed away last night." There was no gasp, no silence of disbelief. Instead, my father replied with a cold, hollow sigh. So the old man finally died. Before I could even process the absolute cruelty of his words, another voice cut in. My younger brother was apparently in the same room. "Grandpa left everything to me. You don't get a thing," he declared, already claiming his prize. Right after that, in the background, my mother let out a short, smug laugh. It was the exact sound of someone who had just won the lottery. They thought they were safe. They thought they had finally won. But my grandfather was sitting less than 3 feet away from the phone, listening to every single word. Slowly, he set his coffee mug down, leaned toward the glowing screen of my device and opened his mouth to speak. A week earlier, the smell of antiseptic in room 517 of Boise Regional Hospital was thick, and so was my grandfather's loneliness. I spent 7 days sitting in a stiff plastic chair beside his bed. He was hooked to an IV monitor, fighting a sudden and severe respiratory infection. The doctors warned us it was critical. I called my parents immediately, expecting them to rush through the emergency room doors. They never arrived. My father claimed his business schedule was tied up with urgent negotiations he simply could not abandon. My mother insisted hospitals gave her severe anxiety and she could not bear the depressing environment. My younger brother, Trevor, ignored my calls entirely. I sent him 3 text messages explaining the severity of the situation, and he left every single one of them on read. I sat there watching the clock tick, holding my grandfather's hand. Every time the heavy wooden door creaked open, he shifted his gaze, hoping to see his son walk into the room. It was always just a nurse checking his vitals or bringing his medication. He never complained about their absence. He just looked back at the ceiling. During those 7 days, I learned things about my family I had spent my whole life refusing to see. I learned that a phone can ring 20 times and still go unanswered when the person on the other end has already decided you are worth more dead than alive. I learned that my mother could post smiling photographs from a weekend spa retreat while her father-in-law struggled to breathe on his own. I learned that the same brother who once borrowed money from our grandfather for a car he never repaid could not spare a single reply to a text message about a man fighting for his life. The physical illness weakened his lungs, but the absolute abandonment broke his spirit. He realized then that if he died they would only care about the reading of his will. That realization birthed the test he proposed at the breakfast table. He wanted to hear with his own ears exactly what his family truly felt about him. He was too proud to guess and too wise to keep pretending. Now the echo of my mother's smug laughter faded from the phone speaker, leaving the kitchen completely paralyzed. My grandfather did not yell. He did not throw his coffee mug across the room. He sat perfectly still. The silence stretched for 10 seconds, then 15. It was the heaviest, most suffocating quiet I had ever experienced. I glanced down at the table. His hands rested flat against the wood. His knuckles were white and his fingers were trembling violently. The man who had worked tirelessly his entire life, who never backed down from hardship, was shaking. It was not rage. It was the physical manifestation of profound heartbreak. He had just heard his own son celebrate his supposed death. The phone line remained open. I could hear them shifting comfortably in the background. My grandfather finally took a deep breath. His hands stopped shaking. He leaned forward, positioning his mouth inches from the microphone. "I am thrilled my departure brought you such immense relief," he said. His tone was not angry. It was terrifyingly calm, completely devoid of any affection. The reaction on the other end was instantaneous. A sharp gasp pierced the speaker. Someone stumbled. I heard a chair scrape aggressively against a hardwood floor, followed by the sound of a glass shattering. "Dad," my father whispered, his voice cracking entirely, losing its previous arrogance. "Dad, is that you?" "Who did you expect?" my grandfather asked. "The estate executor calling to hand over the keys?" "No, wait. You died." "We did not mean what you heard," my father stammered, scrambling frantically to piece together a defense. "It was just a terrible joke. We were in shock. People say crazy things when they are in shock." "You sounded very lucid," my grandfather replied, and Trevor sounded very eager to collect his inheritance. Trevor's voice suddenly appeared, frantic and high-pitched. Grandpa, I did not mean it like that. I was just... Quiet, my grandfather ordered. The single word sliced through the air like a blade. Trevor shut up immediately. My mother tried to intervene, her voice shaking with fake concern. Warren, please do not do this. Let us come over right now. Let us explain. There is nothing left to explain, my grandfather stated. He reached across the table and pressed the red button. The call disconnected. The screen went black. He pushed his chair back and stood up slowly. His eyes had entirely changed. The grief was gone, replaced by absolute resolve. Call the security company, he instructed. I want the alarm codes changed today. I want new locks on the front and back doors by this afternoon. If they show up, do not let them in. He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving no room for argument. The line was drawn. My father now knew he was alive, and more importantly, he knew we had heard everything. 3 days after the lock changing, an unfamiliar dark sedan pulled up in front of my grandfather's porch. A man wearing a wrinkled gray suit stepped out, clutching a thick manila envelope. I opened the heavy front door before he could even raise his hand to knock. He glanced down at a clipboard, asked to confirm the resident, shoved the envelope directly into my hands, and stated flatly that we had been served. He marched back to his vehicle and drove away immediately. I carried the envelope into the living room and handed it to my grandfather. He tore the adhesive seal open and extracted a dense, heavy stack of legal paperwork. I stood right beside his chair, scanning the bold black letters printed across the cover page. It was a formal petition for conservatorship. My father and my mother had officially filed a lawsuit in the county court to seize total control of his life. Their strategy was entirely calculated. My father realized the catastrophic mistake he made during our phone call. He knew my grandfather was completely lucid, and he knew the very first action my grandfather would take was revising the family will to cut them out. My father consulted a lawyer and launched a preemptive legal strike. If he could convince a judge that my grandfather lacked mental capacity before a new will was signed, any changes to the estate would be instantly invalidated. The original will, which handed the entire fortune over to my father and my younger brother Trevor, would remain permanent. My parents wanted to legally declare him incompetent just to protect their unearned inheritance. However, there was an even more desperate reason driving this aggressive attack. The massive, luxurious house my parents currently occupied did not actually belong to them. The property deed remained entirely in my grandfather's name. He had permitted them to reside there rent-free for over a decade. My father understood that after their true nature was exposed, an eviction notice was absolutely imminent. Freezing my grandfather's assets through a court-ordered conservatorship was the only possible way my parents could secure their current lifestyle and stop themselves from being thrown out onto the street. To win this case, they needed hard medical evidence. Since they never once bothered to visit the hospital, they had to manufacture their own proof. I flipped through the attached documents and read the submitted affidavit. They had bribed a former neighbor to submit a fake sworn statement. This man explicitly lied to the court under oath, claiming he frequently found my grandfather wandering the street in the middle of the night, severely confused and unable to remember his own address. He even added a fabricated detail about my grandfather leaving the stove on and nearly starting a fire. The accusation was entirely baseless, designed specifically to convince a judge that my grandfather was an active danger to himself and the surrounding community. The deception went much deeper. My parents utilized their legal counsel to acquire partial medical logs from his recent hospitalization. They intentionally manipulated the context of the attending doctor's clinical notes. They isolated the specific hours when my grandfather was heavily sedated with strong intravenous painkillers to fight his infection. They presented that temporary drug-induced exhaustion as permanent, irreversible dementia. They submitted charts showing his delayed response times while under heavy narcotics, entirely omitting the fact that his cognitive functions returned to normal the moment the medication stopped. They built a fabricated narrative of a fragile, broken old man who desperately needed to be placed in a restricted nursing facility for his own safety. They weaponized the legal system to steal his autonomy. My grandfather finished reading the final page of the petition and placed it down on the glass coffee table. He did not shout or show fear. He tapped his finger against the paper, fully understanding the brutal war his son had just started. The courtroom battle was no longer just about money. It was about preserving his fundamental right to exist as a free man in his own home. He looked up at me and told me to get his coat. We needed to see a lawyer immediately. On Thursday morning, I steered my car into the parking lot of our lawyer's downtown office. Hollis was already waiting for us. He was a veteran civil attorney who specialized in high-stakes estate litigation, and he never wasted time with empty reassurances. We sat across from his massive oak desk. My grandfather slid the court summons across the polished wood. Hollis opened the manila envelope, scanned the fabricated medical claims, and set the documents down with a heavy sigh. He looked directly at my grandfather and delivered a brutal reality check. Defeating a conservatorship petition required much more than just passing a basic memory test. Hollis explained that family court judges look at two distinct pillars of competency. The first is cognitive health. The second, and often the most weaponized, is financial capability. My parents were attacking both. They wanted to convince the court that my grandfather was actively destroying his own estate. If they can prove you are mismanaging your wealth, the judge will strip your rights away to protect the assets, Hollis stated firmly. Your son and his wife will scrutinize your bank statements. They will look for any unusual withdrawal, any missed bill, or any large purchase to paint you as vulnerable and reckless. They will use your own money as evidence against you. I need to show the judge that your financial operations are cleaner than a corporate bank. Every penny must be justified. Medical clearance alone will not save you. We must demonstrate absolute, undeniable financial perfection. The defensive strategy was immediately set into motion. Hollis arranged for my grandfather to undergo comprehensive neurological evaluations with independent specialists later that week. That would easily destroy the fake dementia narrative. But the financial defense required immediate action. Hollis needed to construct a bulletproof financial audit to present to the judge. We had to account for every single dollar, every transfer, and every investment made over the past 12 months. We needed to prove that my grandfather possessed a flawless executive function and a tight grip on his own money. My grandfather did not hesitate. He pulled his master banking ledger from his briefcase and signed a blanket authorization form. He granted Hollis unrestricted access to his primary banking portal, investment portfolios, and tax records. He had nothing to hide. He had managed his wealth meticulously for 50 years, building his fortune through discipline and caution. We felt entirely confident. We believed this financial report would be the ultimate weapon to humiliate my father in the courtroom. Hollis swiveled his chair toward his computer monitors and logged into the secure banking system. The office fell into a tense, determined silence. I sat beside my grandfather, listening to the rhythmic clicking of the computer mouse. Hollis spent the next 30 minutes sorting through complex financial webs. He pulled up the checking accounts, the retirement funds, and the emergency savings. He exported 12 months of detailed statements. The initial records looked perfectly normal. Routine utility bills, medical insurance premiums, grocery purchases, and standard property tax payments populated the screen. Everything aligned with the meticulous behavior of a responsible, highly functional adult. He was managing his estate with the precision of an accountant. The confidence in the room was palpable. We were building an impenetrable fortress of evidence. But then the atmosphere suddenly shifted. The rapid clicking of the mouse abruptly stopped. The silence in the office instantly felt suffocating. Hollis leaned closer to his primary monitor. His posture stiffened. He slowly removed his reading glasses, letting them hang from his fingers, and stared at the screen as if a bomb had just detonated inside the digital ledger. My grandfather noticed the sudden change in his demeanor. He sat up straighter in his leather chair. "What is it?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with sudden concern. Hollis did not answer immediately. He clicked on a specific line of data, opening a detailed transaction receipt. He read the encrypted details twice. Then he slowly turned the monitor around to face us. His finger pointed to a massive outgoing wire transfer highlighted in stark black text. The transaction had bypassed standard security protocols due to an authorized signature clearance. It was not a small accounting error. It was not a routine payment. Exactly 6 months ago, a staggering $412,000 had vanished completely from my grandfather's primary savings account. The air inside Hollis's office suddenly became suffocating as the number on the screen was magnified. $412,000 had been wiped from the savings account in one single electronic sweep. Hollis turned his chair, his piercing eyes demanding an immediate explanation for the massive financial hemorrhage. My grandfather stared at the transaction record. He did not look confused. He looked deeply betrayed. He leaned forward and explained the origin of that specific transfer. 6 months ago, my father and my mother had cornered him in his own living room with a highly detailed business pitch. They claimed my younger brother Trevor had discovered a highly lucrative commercial real estate project on the outskirts of Boise. They presented it as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to secure Trevor's financial independence. They begged my grandfather to provide the initial seed funding, promising the property would yield massive returns within a single year. My grandfather trusted his own flesh and blood. He authorized the massive wire transfer to help his grandson build a stable future. Hollis immediately went to work. He cracked his knuckles, turned back to his keyboard and started aggressively tracking the routing numbers. He utilized his specialized legal database access to cross-reference public business registries, corporate tax filings and property deeds across the entire state of Idaho. He searched for any limited liability company registered under Trevor's name. He searched for commercial permits, zoning applications and land purchases matching the exact time frame of the massive money transfer. The search results returned absolutely nothing. The commercial real estate project did not exist. It was an elaborate ghost story fabricated solely to extract a fortune from a trusting family member. If the money did not purchase land, where exactly did it go? I asked, looking at the dead ends on the glowing monitor. Hollis did not answer verbally. He initiated a deeper forensic trace on the receiving account, pulling the cleared checks and wire transfer logs. The massive sum had not remained intact. It was systematically fragmented and distributed within 48 hours of clearing. Hollis printed the pages, laying the financial autopsy out on the solid oak desk. The first piece of undeniable evidence was a heavy cashier's check issued to a premier luxury auto dealership. Trevor did not invest in commercial property. He walked into a high-end showroom and purchased a brand-new fully loaded luxury SUV, paying the entire exorbitant invoice completely in cash. The vehicle registration documents matched perfectly to his name. The second trail of documents exposed my mother. Hollis highlighted a series of aggressive electronic payments directed to premium credit card companies. My mother had maxed out her limits, purchasing designer handbags and clearing enormous debts at exclusive jewelry boutiques. She used the supposed real estate funds to completely erase her reckless consumer spending habits. The final set of bank statements revealed my father's ultimate hypocrisy. While he was actively preparing to declare my grandfather mentally incompetent in a court of law, he was simultaneously funneling the remaining stolen cash into his personal checking account. Hollis traced direct wire transfers to an elite international auction house specializing in rare vintage wines. My father spent tens of thousands of dollars on imported bottles to stock his private cellar. The remaining funds were actively drained by luxury travel agencies covering first-class flight tickets and extended stays at 5-star tropical resorts. Every single extravagant purchase was brutally exposed on paper. The bank statements formed a perfect, undeniable timeline of absolute greed. They had essentially treated my grandfather as an unlimited personal bank, funding a lavish lifestyle they could never possibly afford on their own. I looked over at my grandfather. The man who had survived a severe illness just a week ago now looked like he was made of solid steel. There was no sadness left in his expression. The emotional devastation from the breakfast table phone call had been completely burned away, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. They did not just want him dead so they could inherit his wealth. They had actively started looting his estate while he was still breathing. And now they were trying to use the legal system to lock him away and cover their tracks. My grandfather reached across the desk, gathered the stack of printed bank statements and aligned the edges perfectly. He looked at Hollis and gave a sharp nod. The evidence of their theft was finally secured. On the following Monday afternoon, realizing we were digging into the financial reports, my parents' legal team hastily submitted a stack of supplementary documents. They filed an emergency motion with the county court, attaching a specific exhibit they claimed would resolve all questions regarding the missing funds. Hollis received the digital copies directly to his secure legal portal. He printed the pages, arranged them on his desk, and called us back into his office immediately. My grandfather sat in the leather chair and adjusted his reading glasses. Hollis handed him a stapled packet of thick papers. It was a standard business loan agreement. My grandfather recognized the core text instantly. Many years ago, he had legally loaned my father a modest sum of money to cover an unexpected business emergency. That original debt was fully repaid and the matter was closed. The first 3 pages of the submitted document were completely authentic. However, the final page was an entirely new creation. My mother, Charlene, had orchestrated a deeply calculated scheme. She rummaged through old family files stored in their basement and located that legitimate, outdated contract. Using that authentic document as a foundation, she drafted a completely fabricated attachment. It was boldly titled as a formal loan and gift addendum. This newly created page explicitly stated that my grandfather authorized a direct transfer of $412,000 to Trevor as an unconditional financial gift. My grandfather stared at the bottom of the paper. He ran his index finger slowly over the black ink. "That is my signature," he said, his voice carrying a sharp, dangerous edge. "But I never signed this specific paper. I have never seen this paragraph in my entire life." My mother had not just forged a random, sloppy signature. She had meticulously traced a genuine signature from a previous page and transferred it onto her fraudulent addendum. She backdated the document to make it appear as if it was executed 6 months ago, perfectly aligning with the exact date the massive wire transfer was initiated. She believed this piece of paper would serve as an absolute legal shield. She thought it would force the presiding judge to dismiss any accusations of financial theft. Hollis did not show a single ounce of panic. He simply took the paper back, placed it into a clear plastic evidence sleeve, and picked up his desk phone. "A traced signature is the easiest fraud to expose," Hollis stated. He immediately contacted a premier forensic document examiner based in Portland. By Tuesday morning, a bonded courier transported the physical documents directly to the forensic laboratory for advanced testing. We waited for 3 tense days. During that time, my parents' legal counsel filed aggressive motions demanding the court accept the addendum as absolute proof of financial consent. They pushed relentlessly to expedite the conservatorship hearing, highly confident their trap was perfectly set. On Friday afternoon, the forensic examiner delivered a comprehensive technical report. Hollis called us to review the final results. The scientific breakdown was brutally definitive. The expert utilized specialized infrared spectrometry and microscopic analysis to completely dismantle my mother's deception. The report outlined 3 undeniable facts. First, the signature on the addendum was a perfect microscopic match to a signature found on page 2 of the original loan agreement. Human beings never sign their name the exact same way twice. The perfect geometric match proved it was mechanically traced using a light board. Second, the chemical composition of the ink on the final page was completely different from the ink used on the original document. The examiner identified a modern printer toner that did not even exist when the initial contract was drafted. Finally, the paper analysis revealed the most damning piece of evidence. The structural fibers of the final page showed 0 signs of natural aging. The examiner concluded with absolute scientific certainty that the addendum was printed, traced, and attached within the last 14 days. My mother manufactured the fake document right around the time my grandfather was fighting for his life in the hospital room. They committed a severe crime to protect their stolen money. They submitted a forged document to a judge. Hollis closed the heavy forensic binder, secured it with a binder clip, and locked it inside his steel filing cabinet. We had the definitive proof required to destroy their case. On the morning of the hearing, the Boise sky was gray and oppressively humid. Inside the county courthouse, the atmosphere felt incredibly tense and suffocating. My father, my mother, and my younger brother Trevor sat confidently on the petitioner's side of the room. They wore expensive tailored suits and practiced expressions of deep, agonizing concern. My grandfather sat right beside me at the defense table, his posture completely rigid, his eyes locked straight ahead. My father's attorney launched the opening assault the moment he was permitted to speak. He paced across the floor aggressively, characterizing my grandfather as a rapidly declining, highly confused old man who posed a severe immediate danger to his own physical and financial well-being. He waved the manipulated hospital charts and the bribed neighbor's sworn affidavit in the air like undeniable weapons. He painted a tragic theatrical picture of an elder losing his grip on reality. He demanded the judge immediately strip my grandfather of his legal rights, seize his assets, and grant my parents full control over the estate to prevent further ruin. Hollis stood up, adjusted his suit jacket and approached the bench. He did not raise his voice or match the opposing lawyer's theatrical energy. He began his counterattack by completely destroying their medical narrative. Hollis submitted comprehensive cognitive evaluations conducted by 2 independent, board-certified neurologists just 48 hours prior. The medical reports unanimously declared that my grandfather possessed exceptional mental acuity and flawless executive function. Hollis then systematically exposed how my parents' legal team had intentionally isolated specific hours where my grandfather was under heavy intravenous narcotics to fake a permanent dementia diagnosis. The judge frowned deeply, his patience visibly wearing thin as he shifted his sharp, accusing gaze toward my father's table. The medical defeat was merely the opening blow. Hollis pivoted instantly to the financial accusations. My father's attorney desperately attempted to argue that my grandfather was recklessly burning through his fortune, specifically highlighting the missing $412,000 as proof of his mental decline. Hollis did not argue. He simply projected the official forensic banking records onto the large courtroom monitors for everyone to see. He methodically traced the exact flow of the stolen money, exposing every single transaction. He showed the judge the dealership invoice proving Trevor purchased a fully loaded luxury SUV entirely in cash. He presented the cleared credit card statements demonstrating my mother actively erasing her massive overdue jewelry boutique debts. He displayed the international auction house receipts confirming my father bought an extensive vintage wine collection and booked first-class tropical vacations. Hollis stated firmly that my grandfather was not mismanaging his wealth. Instead, he was being actively bled dry by the exact individuals attempting to lock him inside a restricted nursing facility. Panic rippled across the petitioner's table. My father's face turned completely pale and sweat formed on his forehead. Trevor slouched down in his chair, staring blankly at the floor. Desperate to regain control of the collapsing case, my parents' lawyer pushed the fabricated loan addendum forward. He frantically claimed the document proved the massive financial transfer was a legally authorized gift willingly signed by my grandfather. Hollis nodded, completely unfazed by the desperate maneuver. He called his primary expert witness to the stand, the forensic document examiner from Portland. The expert walked to the center of the room and projected microscopic infrared images of the addendum's signature onto the large screen. He methodically explained the chemical printer-toner discrepancies and the complete lack of natural paper aging. The climax of his testimony was absolutely devastating. The expert placed the original loan signature over the newly submitted addendum signature. He demonstrated how the 2 signatures were a mathematically impossible, exact geometric match. He explained to the court that human beings never sign their names identically twice. The perfect visual overlap proved undeniably that the signature was mechanically traced using a light board. He concluded under oath that the addendum was a deliberate, recently manufactured forgery. The courtroom fell into an absolute, suffocating silence. My mother covered her mouth with her trembling hands, finally realizing the catastrophic magnitude of their actions. They had just submitted fraudulent, forged evidence to a sitting judge in a desperate attempt to steal an inheritance. The judge had seen enough. He looked at my parents with absolute disgust, refusing to hear any closing arguments. He picked up his wooden gavel and struck it aggressively against the sounding block, the loud crack echoing sharply off the walls. He dismissed the conservatorship petition completely and decisively. The courtroom sank into absolute silence. My father slumped forward, burying his face in his trembling hands. My grandfather did not even spare them a final glance. He stood up, adjusted his coat and walked straight out of the double doors. The legal battle was officially over, but the actual purge was just beginning. We drove directly from the courthouse back to Hollis's downtown office. My grandfather sat down at the heavy oak desk and initiated his ultimate retaliation. He requested Hollis draft a brand new last will and testament right then and there. He did not leave them a single dollar out of a misplaced sense of parental obligation. With a few swift, heavy strokes of his pen, he completely erased my father, my mother, and Trevor from his legacy. They were permanently, legally disinherited, stripped of any future claims to his wealth, and completely removed from any medical directives or power of attorney designations. His fortune would eventually go to charity and to the one person who actually cared for him. The financial execution escalated the very next morning. My grandfather held the absolute property deed to the massive suburban estate my parents currently occupied. They had lived there rent-free for over a decade, enjoying a luxurious lifestyle funded entirely by his quiet generosity. That free ride ended instantly. Hollis dispatched a county sheriff directly to their front door, serving them with a formal, non-negotiable eviction notice. They were given exactly 30 days to vacate the premises. My father attempted to call my grandfather's phone dozens of times, begging for a temporary extension. My grandfather blocked his number. At the end of the month, they were forced to pack their belongings into cardboard boxes and abandon the property, effectively thrown out onto the street. The stolen money still needed to be recovered. Hollis immediately filed a ruthless civil lawsuit against them for the exact sum of $412,000. Cornered by the undeniable forensic evidence already presented during the failed conservatorship hearing, their defense attorneys folded instantly. To satisfy the crushing court judgment, my father and Trevor were legally forced into immediate asset liquidation. They had no cash reserves left to negotiate a settlement. The humiliation they faced was absolute and entirely public. Trevor watched as a tow truck arrived to repossess his brand-new luxury SUV right out of their temporary apartment parking lot. He had to hand over the keys in front of his new neighbors. My father had to personally contact the International Auction House to surrender his extensive vintage wine collection, liquidating it at a massive financial penalty. My mother, stripped of her pride, was forced to sell her designer handbags and expensive jewelry to local pawn shops just to keep up with their soaring legal fees and court penalties. They were left absolutely bankrupt, drowning in severe debt and completely banished from our lives. My grandfather enforced a strict, permanent no-contact rule. We installed high-end security cameras around our property and treated them like complete strangers. With their toxic presence completely removed, our lives returned to a quiet, undisturbed peace. My grandfather's physical health improved dramatically over the following months. We spent our mornings drinking coffee on the back porch, managing his estate and enjoying a quiet life in Boise. He remained as sharp and independent as ever, completely in control of his own destiny. The betrayal initially hurt him deeply, but it ultimately solidified a profound realization between us. Sometimes the people who share your blood are the ones most willing to bleed you dry. True family is never defined by a biological connection, a shared last name, or an expected inheritance. It is defined by unwavering loyalty, mutual respect, and who actually shows up when you are fighting for your life in a hospital bed. Aging might naturally slow down your physical body, but it never gives anyone the right to strip away your dignity or steal your hard-earned independence. Thank you so much for listening to this story until the very end. What would you have done if your own family tried to lock you away just to seize your money? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.